It is Friday, and we are working for Crusoe. Friday, August 1st, 2025. In Los Angeles, he is Sam Park. In Los Angeles, I am John Ramey. We have a lovely cleavage, to use it in the geological sense, in this episode. One half of this episode is about Donald Trump in Scotland and making deals and making news. And the other half is about the U.S. economy. So let's start in Scotland. Sam, have you been to Scotland?
I've not been to Scotland. I hear it's very nice.
I went briefly once, and it was very nice. So Trump went to Scotland, Sam, and it was a private visit, and he wanted to check out two of his golf courses, but he ended up hosting British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and his wife at one of his golf courses, Turnberry. The BBC termed this a peculiar instance in which Starmer was being hosted in his home country. And Trump, kind of like how he uses his cell phone, his private cell phone, seemed to use this trip, a private trip, as a chance to do business. There was nothing kind of formal about it, and yet he comes up with a U.S.-EU trade deal. He spoke about Gaza. He spoke about a number of kind of pressing issues, talked about Russia. I guess that's just the Trump MO, right? There is no delineation between professional and personal.
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, and as you say, he was able to be the host in somebody else's country. And I think we might sort of look at the sort of calendar here and notice that we're just about 6 months in to the Trump second term. And also, we're coming up on the 200-day mark. So if we go back to our episode reviewing the first 100 days, in which we remarked that since winning the election in November, Trump had broadened sort of the aperture of his authoritarian vision to include not just sort of 20th century fascism and other sorts of authoritarian movements of the 20th century, but also 19th century imperialism. And I think that's really the operating framework of a lot of this, right? In many ways, I think what Trump's entire goal with all of the things we're going to talk about today is just being able to appear on television and see himself on television as the emperor of the world. And so he sort of visits the provinces and receives dignitaries from them, and they all sort of line up in his mind to give him money, right? It's just basically, it's all just imperial tribute, all right? And I think that, yes, it was billed as a private trip, but I don't think anybody actually saw it that way. The European Union was very anxious to have an agreement on tariffs and other trade issues in place by the time Trump got to Scotland. And this is exactly what happened. And I don't think it's a coincidence that President von der Leyen of the European Commission was actually in China last week, having trade negotiations with Xi Jinping. And those negotiations were said to be tense. That was the word that many media outlets used. And so if they're not coming to terms with China, they'd really better come to terms with the United States, especially since, as we discussed last week, Japan had reached a deal with the United States then. And I think the elections in Japan were enormously consequential in terms of global trade, because since the ruling party lost that election, they really felt a lot of pressure to come to terms with the United States on trade. So they basically caved. Right. And then once they caved and things did not go well between the EU and China, the EU basically had to cave also, followed in short order yesterday by South Korea. Right. And so all of which, by the way, are at 15% in their general tariff rate.
Ursula von der Leyen, the BBC says the head of the EU's executive. She is the president of the EU Commission. Is that right?
Yes, then they are the executive branch of the European Union.
Wouldn't you love to have a cup of tea with President von der Leyen and just ask her to contrast and compare meeting with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump?
At a minimum, yes. I think that and I have to say that President von der Leyen was a sort of kind of consolation prize candidate for the presidency of the European Commission when she first got it a number of years ago, right? The various EU countries were kind of at an impasse as to who to nominate, and so she was the sort of best sort of backup candidate that they could come up with, and
The Mick Taylor, if you will,
sort of something like that. I
best
mean,
available.
yeah, but I think that she's sort of proved all her detractors wrong. She's executed her job with remarkable aplomb all the way through in a very challenging international environment.
Okay, so just the details on the EU-US trade deal. The EU is committed to buying $750 billion in energy from the US over 3 years. They have committed to invest $600 billion in the US. This allowed Trump to declare the deal bigger than Japan's, which promised $550 billion of investments. This is reporting from The Guardian. I mean, anything of note? As you said, the EU kind of had, I mean, I guess Trump had a good negotiating position here and
Absolutely.
appeared to strike pay dirt.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's just a larger version of the Japan deal, and the EU is larger than Japan. So that's exactly what it should be, right? And by the way, the South Korea trade deal is kind of a smaller version of the Japan deal because South Korea is a smaller country than Japan is. So, I mean, basically, and I think it's interesting that these are three of the wealthiest countries and therefore the largest trading partners that the United States has outside of China, right? And so it seems though as though wealthy countries are getting a good deal, whereas a lot of the poorer countries are facing much higher tariff rates in the area of 20 to 30%. And so it seems as though if you're in the G7, you're doing okay, apart from Canada, which, Trump appears to have a special grudge against.
I mean, that checks out generally with what
Yeah.
we can glean Trump's worldview is.
Yes. And again, these are the important colonies of the empire, right? And the other ones he doesn't really care. And frankly, it's not that big a deal. Poorer countries are poor because they don't trade a lot, right? Or at least their lack of trading activity is a function of their poverty, right? So if they're facing enormous tariffs on their exports to the United States, I mean, that's not good for them, but it's not like they were exporting tons of stuff to the United States anyway.
Other things came up during this private trip, air quotes. The BBC reporting that Trump said the U.S. would work with the UK and other European partners to set up food centers. This is in relation to the famine, the starvation crisis, the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Trump added that he will tell Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to ensure that food gets to people who need it. Quote, I want to make sure they get the food, every ounce of food. Trump, also seemed to give the green light to Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, to officially recognize the state of Palestine, even though that is not something the U.S. will do. Quote, I'm not going to take a position, and I don't mind him taking a position. That is a quote from U.S. President Donald Trump. The president also took every opportunity to use this trip to proudly promote his two Scottish golf resorts. This is, again, the BBC reporting. He hosted the press conferences with Starmer and with von der Leyen in the newly renovated ballroom at Turnberry. That is one of his two golf courses in Scotland, boasting of the opulent new ceiling and brand new windows at the same time as discussing the famine in Gaza. Any thoughts on the developments regarding Gaza and the humanitarian
Well, it's
disaster
it's
there?
it's just ghastly. It's awful. In fact, Trump's main envoy, Steve Witkoff, along with the United States ambassador to Israel, former Arkansas governor and presidential candidate Mike Huckabee, are in or have been in Gaza today at one of the facilities operated by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. And I've only seen a little bit of reporting about this, so we don't know exactly how that visit went and what their assessment of the GHF's activities might be. So we'll have to table that for the future. As far as Keir Starmer goes, though, he said that the United Kingdom would recognize a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly in next month
So that's France and the UK now pledging to do that, right?
Correct. Although France said that they were just going to go ahead and do it, right? Starmer said that the United Kingdom would recognize a Palestinian state unless Israel met certain conditions. And this has been widely, and I think justifiably, ridiculed by many people, right? It's just like, so one group of people has a legitimate national aspiration, and your recognition of that aspiration will depend on the actions of some other country. How does that, how does that either they have a legitimate aspiration or they don't, right? And so why should that depend at all on the actions of Israel? And so I don't really understand what Starmer thinks he's doing here. I'm sure that there are sort of domestic political considerations inside of the United Kingdom that are somehow influencing this decision, but I don't really quite get what those might be. And so, and meanwhile, uh, the Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney, said that Canada would also conditionally support a Palestinian state at the UN General Assembly. I'm guessing that Carney must have known that that his country, Canada, would not be reaching a trade accord with the United States, because otherwise, I think he would have kept that in his pocket, right? I think he would have, if there was a trade deal to be had, he would have gotten that done and then come out with because the General Assembly is not till next month.
I struggle to not be cynical about these gestures from Canada or France or the UK. I just don't. I understand there might be some symbolic importance to this. And if it had happened, I don't know, any time in the last 80 years or 75 years, it would be a bigger deal. But it just seems it seems extremely cynical now.
I think that's totally justifiable and probably correct. But there's sort of a cultural difference between how European politics work and how our politics work, right? For instance, now of course,
That's a polite way to put it.
well, of course, the United Kingdom is no longer in the European
Sure.
Union, but they were for a long time, and so their uh, sort of international relations still work very much along the same lines that EU international
Okay.
relations work. These are just sort of markers of global influence, right? And so basically, what these countries are saying is, uh, your country, Israel, and also the United States, by the way, you're just
Mhm.
losing influence. Okay. If we're actually considering doing this, then uh, you're sort of running out of road here, right? Not immediately, right? But this is not going to be sustainable in the long term. For instance, uh, Slovenia announced this week that they were going to stop any sort of arms trade with Israel, right? And of course, Israel would justifiably say, "Oh no, how are we ever going to get by without
Right.
all these weapons from Slovenia?" But the point is that this is exactly the role that a country like Slovenia plays inside of European foreign policy, right? Is that you actually want a small, inconsequential country to take the larger step, or right, to take the sort of more extreme position, right? Just so you can say, well, look, we've got member states that are not cool with this, all right,
Right.
and so we could, for instance, this recognition of the state. Uh, Ireland has already done this, right?
Sure.
Spain has already done this, right? Again, these are smaller, less consequential states inside of the European Union, but it's just sort of a kind of signal flare that the EU can send up. And I don't expect that this will be the end of this process. Again, I think it's too late, but it's better to happen now than never.
Okay. So will you steel man or check my logic on this? Uh, Generally, European politics, including the UK, would be historically viewed as less sympathetic towards Israel when compared to the United States over the last in the post-war since Israel was founded in 1948.
Not much,
Mo-
but a little bit, perhaps. Yeah.
Only a little bit.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean,
Okay,
for instance,
but increasingly so maybe in the last 40 years.
sure.
Okay.
But the thing is,
The
if you're going
only
to,
reason the only reason things like this haven't happened more, like we're going to recognize a Palestinian state across various EU entities, has been the influence of U.S. foreign policy and their close relationship with Israel, right?
no, I don't think that's true.
Okay.
For instance, the United Kingdom bears some sort of legacy responsibility as the former imperial power
Sure.
and for instance, in 1956, the UK and France conspired with Israel to try and take back Suez from Egypt, right?
Sure.
That's certainly, and in fact, it was the United States who objected to it,
Right.
right? So, meanwhile, Germany, just for understandable historical reasons, has always been very just sort of reflexively supportive of
Sure.
Israel.
Sure.
And there have always been an enormous power inside of the EU. And that's sort of the point I'm making, is that not all these countries actually agree with each other for different reasons about how to address Israel. But one thing I would say is that, recognizing a Palestinian state is one thing. How about ending military assistance? That would actually be a much more consequential step to take, which, by the way, apart from Slovenia, right, and maybe one or two other small EU nations, none of these actually important European countries seem willing to do.
Okay. Also coming up during their press conferences in the newly renovated ballroom at Turnberry Golf Course, Trump made a significant change to his position on the conflict in Ukraine. Again, the BBC. He revealed that he is now giving Russian President Vladimir Putin only 10 to 12 days to agree to a ceasefire, not the 50 days he had previously given him. Again, this is reporting from earlier in the week. So what are we at? 9 days now? 8 days? I mean,
Yes, this might perhaps come to fruition in the coming days.
Donald Trump and deadlines are not.
Yeah,
It's a fluid state. Let's put it that way.
we'll see.
Uh, he said, "quote There is no reason in waiting. I want to be generous, but we just don't see any progress being made." What do we make of Trump with the scales possibly falling from his eyes regarding Vladimir Putin?
I mean, it would be great.
Do we
I don't.
believe that's what's happening here?
It's certainly possible, right? I mean, the problem is that this should have happened quite some time ago, right?
Obviously, he should have never felt as though he had a friendship with this guy.
Yeah, and I think it might be beginning to dawn on him that that's just not going to happen. That Putin was never actually interested in being his friend,
Yeah.
right? And uh, and if that's the sort of trajectory that he's on, I wonder what Putin might think he could do in order to reverse that trajectory. And I struggled to think of what that might be, but what do I know?
Okay. One other note in foreign affairs before we pivot to the U.S. economy, where we got just a crackling week of news. But
Crazy.
first, date. What's that?
It's crazy.
Yeah. But real quick, Dateline Bangkok, Thailand, the Associated Press reporting Thailand and Cambodia reaffirmed their shaky ceasefire on Wednesday after China helped mediate a peace process to end days of border fighting. We talked about this last week. The ceasefire reached in Malaysia was supposed to take effect at midnight on Monday, but was quickly tested. Thailand's army accused Cambodia of launching attacks in multiple areas early Tuesday, while Cambodia said there was no firing in any location. The Thai army then reported exchanges of gunfire into Wednesday morning, but said there was no use of heavy artillery. So Thailand and Cambodia are not at war, but stay tuned.
Yes, I mean, and I think it's likely that they'll die down and we won't hear about it again for a little while. Interestingly, Trump took credit for this. He said that they had agreed to stop fighting because he said he would not reach a tariff deal with either of them if they continued fighting. And you know what? He might be right about that. I think there were certainly other factors involved, right? For instance, it was Malaysia that hosted this summit, right?
China
And
obviously brokered a
China
huge part.
clearly
Yeah.
had a role to play here. But it again supports Trump's sort of imperial posture, right? He's like, I caused them to make peace because of our enormous imperial reach. It fits right in with everything else he's doing.
Okay. On to the U.S. economy. CNN reporting stocks across the globe were lower Friday today after President Donald Trump unveiled his plan for levying tariffs on trading partners, threatening to upend decades of international cooperation. Trump late yesterday, released his long awaited plan for tariffs on U.S. trading partners. It is the deadline, August 1st, Sam. The president laid out tariffs ranging from 10 to 41% on countries from Chile to Syria, set to take effect on August 7th, which was later than expected. Quote, our base case remains that the U.S. effective tariff rate should settle at around 15% by the end of the year, and the economic impact is likely to prove manageable, end of quote, according to Ulrich Hoffman Bacardi, global head of equities at UBS Global Wealth Management.
Well, that's a lot of name.
Yeah. He had more to say. Quote, still, tariffs are a headwind for global trade and growth, and they have started to contribute to a rise in inflation, Hoffman Bacardi said. Quote, with markets already pricing in much of the good news on the trade front, we expect stock volatility to pick up in the near term. End of
Okay,
quotation.
now just to interject here, Hoffman Bacardi is a hyphated surname. Is that right? Okay,
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that right? Okay, please
yeah.
go ahead.
That's all I have from Ulrich Hoffman Bacardi
Oh, that's too bad.
of
Okay,
UBS Global Wealth Management.
okay, terrific.
Yeah. So what are we? April to August? Is that what we've got 4 months of this tariff kind of will he, won't he dance?
Yes.
Right.
And there's
Okay.
still, I would say, some outlying uncertainties here and there, right? For
You
instance,
don't say.
yeah, I mean, but not as much as there was before, right? People generally know what their tariff rate is going to be, and uh, again, the richer countries seem to have done better, right? I think India is one of the big losers because they've come down with 25%, right? And it's got to be very embarrassing for Narendra
It's
Modi
like
because
a
he
draft lottery or
yeah, I
something.
mean, he's done everything he can to try and, be nice to whoever the president of the
He's
United
done
States is.
everything he can to be the Indian Trump.
Yes, all right, but he's always been like that. He didn't need
Yeah.
Trump's cue to be like
Right.
that
Fair
sort of
enough.
leader.
But
But
again, you'd think he'd get a better shake with a big market and kind of similar orientation politically.
yeah, but apparently he refused to come to terms on things like the agricultural sector. He didn't want to open up India to American agricultural products, although
They
neither
don't
did
want our
South.
rice, Sam?
No, I mean, it's strange for India because they've been coming up the income tables without becoming a large scale industrial power, which almost never happens.
Like
I think
China had to do that to move
that's
up.
right, right? I think it's largely just from having just such a large consumer market, right? But many people get by on just subsistence farming and small scale sort of product farming in India, and it would be too destabilizing for India. Interestingly, though, South
Oh, that's
Korea.
interesting. Okay.
South Korea was able to shield its agricultural sector and not open it up uh, to to American agricultural products. But I think that they had more to bring to the table just by agreeing to higher tariffs on their that is identical tariffs for their automotive and uh, other industrial products in line with Europe and Japan. Also, they were able to offer, hundreds of billions of dollars in so-called future investment, but especially in their case in things like shipbuilding, which is something that the United States, regardless of who the president is, very much wants to sort of restore. Because we're not
I'll
building
say,
ships,
oh
right,
my
in
God,
this country.
it's a national disgrace.
It is, and South Korea is one of the world's largest shipbuilding powers, and so they have companies. For instance, the Hyundai Automotive Company, which where that is we know as an automotive company, got their start as a shipbuilding company many years ago, long before they were a car company. So they could actually bring a lot of expertise to bear in investing in shipbuilding in the United States, and I think that's the sweetener for that deal that India obviously couldn't come up with.
And Arkansas rice producers get shut out. Sorry,
Yeah,
I'm still hung up on rice from last week.
but they've got Japan, and again, that's not
Right.
really all that meaningful as we discussed. But they've got the
No.
Japan deal to at least help them out a little bit, and to the extent that it can help out. But there's so many other economic stories this
So
week.
I'm glad you brought that up. So I started with the tariffs because I thought that was probably, well, it's the most timely. And then I feel like it is also the context in which we understand this other data.
Yes, I think that's true.
Okay.
It's
So Sam,
perhaps the
then
most important
right,
contextual point. It's not the
right.
entire context.
No, but it's kind of like if you're going to describe life on Earth, maybe start with gravity or something.
Well, but that's everywhere, right? I would say
Sure.
water, frankly. I mean,
Fine. Okay. If you're going to describe the universe, start with gravity. The
sure.
tariffs are the gravity of what we're living in economically now. So power rank, or tell me, what should we talk about then next? The jobs report, inflation, or the GDP report?
I'd say start with GDP. We could basically go in order, right?
You mean chronological order?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. All right. So the gross domestic product in the United States, the world's largest economy. CNBC reporting the U.S. economy grew at a much stronger than expected pace in the second quarter, powered by a turnaround in the trade balance and renewed consumer strength, the Commerce Department reported Wednesday. Gross domestic product, a sum of goods and services activity across the sprawling U.S. economy, jumped 3% for the April through June period, according to figures adjusted for seasonality and inflation. That 3% topped the Dow Jones estimate for 2.3% and helped reverse a decline of 0.5% in the first quarter. Remember, the first quarter there was negative growth, and we were like, oh my goodness. So GDP, kind of from the long view, strong. Okay. Although I watched with Sarah Eisen, the former investor guy on CNBC, you sent me that link. And I thought he said, look, when you look at it from far back, this is great. But when you zoom in a little bit, you see some cracks.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically, this is the first quarter. GDP fell because so many importers were trying to get goods into the United States ahead of the tariffs that were expected at the very end of the first quarter. All right. And
So basically, people took a loss to make sure they had inventory.
no, they didn't take a loss, right? They just ordered all the
Or
stuff they could, right?
they
The
just
United States
gorged
economy
themselves
took a
on, yeah,
loss, right?
yeah,
Because imports are a negative factor in determining gross domestic product,
right, right.
right? And so once they'd stocked up on everything, they didn't need to order anything in the second quarter because they already had so much product in storage, right? And
That's the
so
powered by a turnaround in the trade balance
that's
part of the
right. And so
report.
basically, this is just a wash, right? I
Yeah.
mean, I think if we could average the first two quarters, basically the first 6 months of the year are what, 1.65% or whatever, the average of the first two quarters is, right? And so that's, this is sort
That's
of almost.
good. That's not a recession. That's not 2 quarters
No,
en route to a
it's
recession.
fine,
Yeah.
but it's basically a non-story, right? It's just,
Right.
none of this would have happened if it wasn't for the tariff regime, as you pointed out to introduce this segment.
Okay. So then, inflation, CBS News. The Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure, the Personal Consumption Expenditures, the PCE, ticked higher last month, signaling that President Trump's tariffs are pushing some prices higher. Prices rose 2.6% in June compared with a year ago, according to the Commerce Department yesterday, up from an annual pace of 2.4% in May. So the trend line continues up. Excluding the volatile food and energy categories, which is really how people colloquially understand inflation, but understandably they're not included. Prices rose 2.8% in the past year, the same as the previous month, which was revised higher. So you've had 2.8% inflation each of the last 2 months. Okay.
Yes.
The figures help illustrate the central bank's reason for its decision Wednesday, the Fed, to keep its key interest rate steady, with Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell stressing that inflation still remains above the Fed's goal of a 2% annual rate. Powell suggested it could take months for the central bank to determine whether the president's new import duties would cause just a one time rise in prices or a more persistent increase in inflation.
Yes, I mean, the Fed could be in for a dilemma here, right? For instance, the jobs report that we got today was
Well,
terrible,
that's right.
right? And so
So their dual mandate could get much more challenging, is what you're
that's
saying.
right. There's a tension between the two aspects of that mandate, right? That if inflation is going up, they should want to raise interest rates, right? If it's a one-time adjustment, then they might not need to do so. But if unemployment keeps going, or if employment continues to fall, then they'll want to lower interest rates, which is, of course, what the president would prefer, as he mentioned last week in his hard hat wearing trip to the Federal Reserve.
God, that was Michael Dukakis level great with
It was
both of
it
them
was
in the hard
really
hats.
it was pretty.
Yeah.
By the way, on that same level, Steve Witkoff and Mike Huckabee in Gaza today were sporting outfits that we should I would
Oh,
describe as combat golf. Maybe we can hunt up a picture and put it up here. Maybe not. But it's really something. I would recommend everybody that is looking for a good laugh today to check that out. But to
well,
return
those are
to
two deeply unserious slash hilarious people,
that's
just
right.
objectively. Yeah.
Absolutely. This would lead us again to the jobs report, which came in today and was
Okay.
pretty weak.
Okay. So CNN, weaker than expected jobs numbers for July. The U.S. economy added just 73,000 jobs last month. Okay. That's A. That's usually that figure since we've been doing this podcast is usually a six-figure number,
Yes, that's right.
like most months. It's only 73,000. But CNN reporting that was overshadowed by something entirely separate, revisions to the two prior months' job numbers, which had been good, right? The monthly totals for May and June were revised down by a combined 258,000 jobs. The prior 2 months' revisions were, quote, stunning, said Diane Swonk, chief economist at KPMG, in an interview with CNN. May's estimated 144,000 job net gain was revised down by 125,000. So the number had been 144,000 and it went down to 19,000. And June's tally of 147,000 went down to 14,000, according to data released Friday from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Swonk again, quote, it's stalling out right now, Swonk said of the labor market. That's CNN reporting. Okay, so unemployment's still what, at like 4.2, but what was the thing the dude on CNBC was talking about? Jolts, job openings, or people leaving their jobs?
Yes, that's right.
Right.
Quit rates, essentially.
Yeah.
Yes,
Nobody's quitting their job.
that's right. And you would, in a
Everybody's,
healthy job market, you would expect people to be doing so.
yeah.
Now, there's a lot going on here. For instance,
Okay, so the GDP's good. Nobody's quitting their job. Inflation is trending up. Like, there's a lot of ways to read it.
well, yes, but one way that we might read it is what we would call stagflation,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
And if that is the economy stagnates while inflation rises. But just to return for a second to the hiring, some economists believe that part of the low rate of hiring is due to the immigration actions, right? If people are being deported or scared to try to go to work, nobody can hire them, right? So it's not, it's
Sam, I propose we have the taco stand index in Los Angeles,
right.
right? This is just look at how many taco stands are or are not operating right now
Yeah.
in the current ICE environment and how many people they are or are not employing.
Exactly, right? Now that would be fine for us locally, right?
Sure.
But if there's fewer people trying to get jobs, then they can't get them, right? And so it's not just that there's fewer jobs, it's so that even if you have a job opening, you might not be able to hire somebody. And so it's the worst of both worlds, right? And this is one of those economic phenomena that seems counterintuitive. And so I'm glad that we were able to talk about it today. Right. And so it's not, in other words, the low rate of hiring isn't just because, isn't necessarily because employers don't want to hire people, right? It's just because they can't, right? In some cases, that is, right? Also, I would say that now that the tariff regimes are in place, people might feel that they at least have a better understanding of how the economy is going to work. So hiring might actually rebound a little bit because the tariffs have been put in place. We don't know though, because we have never seen a tariff increase on this order in our lives. We'll
I
see.
mean, 50 years ago, a lot of smart people worked really hard to come up with policies to prevent stagflation, and now those policies are being deliberately unwound. Am I understanding that correctly?
I mean, there's some distance that would still need to be traveled for them to be on what, but that seems to be the goal that the Trump administration is pursuing. Yes, I would say that's right.
Okay. Onward for August. When we do this next week, I will be back in the biggest little city because, Sam, it's the 1st of August. You know what that means? College football.
Yes,
Camp
I'm
is
afraid I
open.
do know what that means. Yes.
Camp has opened for the Wolfpack. So I'm sure you'll be looking forward to an update on that.
Very much. Yes.
Anything we should keep our eyes on for next week?
Well, I'll
We
be
know
traveling,
something will
so we'll
happen.
probably try and evergreen a very special episode for
Oh, that's right.
you folks out there. But we'll see what happens. I mean, and things have been so crazy just in the past 2 episodes, it's difficult to say what might actually happen in the coming weeks.
All right, he's Sam. I'm John. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, folks.